Okay, so last time we added a lot to the playability of our game by just focusing on some solid game mechanics and making the monsters a little bit more fun to shoot. So you can see here these animations and the sounds that we added make the game more fun to play. But if I move the player around and I make one mistake, my player just kind of disappears. And that's sort of boring. It doesn't really add a ton of suspense to the game. So just as we can make our game more fun to play by making the monsters more fun to shoot, we can also add some suspense to our game by adding the same sorts of animations and sounds. And so just as we can severely enhance the playability of our game simply by making it more fun to shoot the monsters with sounds and animations and things like that, we can do the same thing when our player gets hit, and we can therefore add some real suspense to the game and make it fun to play. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this lesson. And on top of that, I'm going to show you a couple things to make it look more professional. So the first thing that we want to do is give our player some sort of an animation when he runs into the monster. So we're going to get rid of the destroy. So if we say when we're going to have the monster run into the player, instead of the player getting destroyed, we're going to add a different action. We're going to add an animation to our player. So in fact, instead of doing that, let's go into the player object and create our first full-scale animation. So if you double click on the player, the editing screen comes up for the player object, and over here is the animations window. So if I click on the default, I can just right click and select duplicate. So now I have a new animation, and I'm going to call that one player spin. I'm going to do a couple of things. One is I'm going to have the player maybe turn red a little bit when he runs into the monster, and I want him to kind of move back a few feet and spin around. So remember the fact that I've duplicated the default animation. The reason I duplicated the default animation is so that I could copy this first frame. And every object that you create and every sprite that you create in Construct comes with the default animation, which has just the 1-0 frame. But I'm going to create an additional animation, and I'm going to call it player spin. And I'm going to use the existing first frame to make a pretty cool animation. So I'm going to, and like I said, we're just in the beginning stages of animation, so this is going to be super complex, but we can do some cool stuff without going all crazy just yet. So first thing I'm going to do is duplicate the original frame. I'm just going to spin it. And if you double click on the other one, if you double click on the previous frame and then go back, it resets itself. Now the cool thing about this is not only did I do this spin thing here, but if I click on this tool here and I click on image point 1, you can see that the image point 1 where all my bullets spawn and everything spins around with me, so I don't have to do any extra work there, and that's pretty nice. Next thing I want to do is duplicate it again, and I'm going to click this rotation tool, and I'm going to click the same rotation tool each time, and that way I'm spinning in the same direction each time I do this. So I spun 90 degrees, and I'm going to double click on the previous frame, and then that kind of resets the thumbnail so everything shows up so I know what I'm doing. Duplicate one more time, and I'll go ahead and let's spin this, and then I'll double click on the previous and go here. And in this case, to simplify things, I'm going to duplicate this one more time and go all the way back to the beginning. That way I know there's no funny business. My player's right back ready to go and shooting at monsters once that animation's finished. So next thing I do, and I'll close this out, is in this on collision with player event here that we created, instead of destroying the player, I'm going to go ahead and set the animation on the player, and so I can just type that here, set animation, and we're going to set the animation to player spin. And we just have to call the animation by name. And so we're going to double check. I'm going to click done here, but I'm going to double check. I'm going to double click the player object over here so I can check the name of my animation. I just want to make sure everything's spelled right. And I think I can even copy that and paste it into the other thing if I need to. So let's make sure that's spelled properly, which it is. And we're going to play that animation from the beginning and click done. The other thing I want to do is I want to add another action where the player is going to move back at an angle, and I'm going to have him move at the angle of the monster. So I'm going to type in monster.angle, and I'm going to have him move back about 150 pixels. I'm going to click done. So if we click play on this, you can see if I run into any monsters, you can see that I spin around and I like kind of move back. And the only problem with that is that you can see as I'm hitting these monsters, the movement is not very noticeable. And the reason why that is, if you look on the player object, we have this behavior called scroll to, where the system is actually continuously scrolling the window onto the player. So if we really want to get a realistic sort of backflip thing when we hit the monsters, we want our player to really appear to be moving back when he's running into these monsters. So what we want to do is we're going to add a new action, and I'm actually going to put the movement before the spin, and then I'm going to disable the scroll. So if I click on, let's try this again. I'm going to add another action. I'm going to double click on player, and I'm going to type in scroll here, and there's a scroll to section, and instead of set enabled, I'm going to set the state to disabled on the scroll, and I'm going to drag that up, and that's going to be first. So before I do anything else, I'm going to set the scroll to disabled, and then I'm going to, and actually on second thought, maybe I want my player to be spinning as he's moving back to 150 pixels. So I probably put player spin first. I'm going to disable the scroll, and then once all these things are finished, then I will, let's maybe wait. We'll add a wait in here. I will wait for 0.3 seconds. Let's go 0.3. It gets mad at us when we don't put the 0. And then I will set the scroll on player back to enabled. So now if I click play on this, let's go ahead and find some monsters here. Now you can kind of see my guy move back, and even though the scrolling's a little weird and it does eventually catch up with us, you can actually see the player move back a little bit, and that's pretty fun to do. So the next thing I want to do is add a tint to my player so that can turn on when he gets hit. And just like it made it more fun to shoot the monsters when we added that red tint to them when they get hit, when your player gets hit, it's going to add a sense of urgency, like, hey, I need to get away from these monsters or kill them all so that I don't continue to get to absorb damage. So what I'm going to do is add the effect. So if I go down here into effects, I can just add, and I can search for tint up here. And so that's added, and I'm going to stick with the 125-25 that we did before. You can switch it up however you like. There's many different ways to do this, but I like these numbers for mine. And so I'm going to go back here, and the first thing I want to do is I want to say on the start of the layout, I want to set that player tint. Let's see, where is that? We're going to disable tint on the start of the layout. Now, remember that we did that from the monsters, because if the default position is enabled, which it is with tint, then the monsters are going to start out red, and that's going to be weird. Same thing with the player. We want to disable the tint at the start, and you can see there's both of our disabled tints at the start of the layout. Next thing I want to do is when the player gets hit, let's make the first thing that we do is we set the tint to enabled. And what I want to do with that is I want to put it like one of the first things. I want like one of the first things that I do is for the player to turn red, because I think that that's I think it'll look better that way. So the next thing I want to do is I want to, after these 0.3 seconds, I'll probably want to set that tint back to disabled. So I'll put that right after the 0.3. And also that scroll 2 is still engaging itself a little bit too soon. So I want to add another wait time, and I'm going to make this one, let's make this one a full 1 second. And then I'm going to put that right in between. Once my tint goes down, I'm going to wait another full second on top of that before I scroll to the player. So if you want to get an idea of the playability of this, we can go in and I can start looking for some monsters to run into. And you can see my guy's kind of jumping all over the place because we still have some issues with the window size. But you can see that that animation happens before any scroll 2 happens. And I actually get to see the animation first before any of that stuff goes down. So you can see just these little simple things can really have an effect on how the player feels as they're playing the game. And as you play your games, you're really going to understand that. So as we're working, what I would encourage you to do is to add colors and sounds and effects and animations that are going to make you're going to attempt to make your people that play your game make them feel it when their player gets injured, make them feel the hurt themselves. So also in this on collision with player box, I would probably add some sounds and maybe anything else like a player hit sound, like a hurty sound that you can download from Open Game Art. And as your player gets hit, have it play the sound. We already know how to do audio. We did that on the last lesson, so I'm not going to go back over that. But I definitely want to encourage you. Sound is going to be a huge element, a huge part of giving your players that sense of urgency. But as it is right now, we have a solid framework for setting up player hit animations and basically the overall reaction of your character when he gets hit by a monster. So what I would encourage you to do is follow your creative vision and do everything that you possibly can to make it a real event when your player gets hit, so that it adds a sense of urgency to the user. And then to really drive that point home, on the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to make a player health bar in your heads-up display that'll go down as your player loses health. So that'll add an even bigger sense of urgency. And then on top of that, we'll make a nice game over screen.